Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and my guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, John.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yes, Jonathan, I would like you. There are so many things that are happening at the same time, and it's impossible to cover everything, as you know. But let's start at least with something. What would you like to pay our attention?
Well, first of all, there is something that is a development that we are obviously all watching in the United States, dealing with illegal immigration that is going to have a major it will first have an indirect impact, but it will later have a major impact on the war in Ukraine because it affects U.S. internal stability. As you know, illegal immigration was one of the top issues that voters were concentrated on the U.S. presidential election. And the voters judged quite correctly that Donald Trump had the proper approach, and they supported mass deportations. Now, interestingly enough, within the last day or so, Sean Hannity, who you might know as a Fox News Network contributor and major radio personality, TV. He is a very close friend of President Trump. And also, he recently conducted an interview with Texas Governor Greg Abbott. And one of the things that he suggested during the interview is an idea which has merit to start with and ought to be built upon and expanded to its full potential. What Sean suggested is that the United States basically offer a payment of $1,000 to every illegal immigrant who voluntarily comes forward to be deported. And they would be paid $1,000 and then flown wherever it is they need to be flown. That is an excellent start. However, it needs more teeth to be built to become fully useful to the Trump administration in conducting its mass deportation efforts with maximum efficiency as well as humanity and consideration. Here's what we should do. And it should be passed along at possible. Tom Homan, who is going to be the new border czar, can use this very effectively in conjunction with other efforts. You basically put a $1,000 bounty on every illegal immigrant that resides within the United States. And then basically you make the similar offer that what Sean Hannity spoke of. Those all illegal immigrants who voluntarily come forward to law enforcement agencies for voluntary deportation out of the United States will be paid their bounty of $1,000. However, now here's where you put teeth into it. Those who do not voluntarily come forward now have a $1,000 bounty on their heads, in which any American citizen or law enforcement agency that identifies and locates illegal immigrants to law enforcement agencies, they will receive the $1,000 bounty instead of the illegal immigrant. And if they are deported and they're given credit for it, then they are given the $1,000 bounty. What this effectively does is it energizes and incentivizes the entire American population who are American citizens and who support President Trump's deportation policies to voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement agencies in the identification and location of all illegal immigrants within the United States. There's no violence involved here. Basically, you have a very large informal intelligence network countrywide that is formed with Americans voluntarily cooperating and identifying and locating. So this would not only be a great benefit to Americans who are trying to make ends meet in coping with higher inflation, which the president at the same time is combating with his policies, but also it forces every illegal immigrant in the United States to make their own cost-benefit analysis Do I leave voluntarily and at least get paid, or am I going to simply be identified, and the people who identify me, are they going to be the ones who get paid? So this provides a very powerful mechanism, but it voluntarily encourages the American people to support President Trump in his policies and actively participate in doing so. Now, you could actually increase the incentive by saying all those illegal immigrants who have criminal records, and there are quite a few, according to the administration and some others, their bounty is doubled to $2,000. If you identify an illegal immigrant with a criminal record, then the bounty becomes $2,000 rather than $1,000. And it is also quite possible that law enforcement agencies by themselves, without necessarily cooperation or assistance of the American public, would be able to identify and basically deport these illegal immigrants. They would then receive from the federal government the $1,000 or $2,000 for having done this. And what the law enforcement agencies could then do with that money is they could use that money that they receive to compensate the families of those who have been victimized by illegal immigrants. And this way you have a complete circuit. You have a complete cooperative system in place that maximizes the participation of the American public who support President Trump. And that would be a very powerful mechanism once you have it in place. What the incoming administration plans to do is forceful enough, but what it needs in order to be truly effective is to have the voluntary and enthusiastic support of the American public in identifying and locating illegal immigrants.
Brilliant. I love everything what you just said, and you know what?
It's only brilliant if it works.
Oh, absolutely, but you have to start somewhere, and
exactly. But this is amazing. And Sean gave us a good start with his suggestion to Governor Abbott. Yes, that is a good point. It needs to be built upon and expanded to its full potential, to where it becomes a very effective, powerful mechanism. And I applaud Sean Hannity. If he should see this, I applaud Sean Hannity for having made that suggestion to the governor. It needs to be expanded upon and developed to its full potential, and I hope we will be able to get that information and that idea into the proper hands.
Absolutely. And you know, a lot of people, when they were thinking about this immigration issue, and specifically deportation issue, they were taking very vulgar point of view that we are talking about millions of people taken out of their houses and deported who knows where, and so on. It's not the case at all. You are absolutely right. It has to be well thought out, detailed process. However, at the same time, let's say you deport 10,000 people. But at the same time, there are 20,000 illegals cross the border. So are you ahead of the game or not? Probably not. So first you have to figure out how to close the border, there will be virtually no.
And the incoming Trump administration and the state of Texas, and they all have plans in place and the material and the people ready to carry that out and shut down the border immediately. That is one thing. That is the very first thing they are going to do, is shut down the border. Absolutely. And then at the same time, they will initiate the process of mass deportation. There is also another wrinkle that you could add to this mass deportation, is that you could, once you have illegal immigrants in your custody, but they still wish to remain in the United States, you could give them an offer. And this is similar to what one author suggested as that offering military service as a way of earning one's citizenship. You could offer Robert Heinlein, the science fiction author who was the author of Starship Troopers. Mm-hmm. He suggested that military service ought to be what every citizen should do in order to earn their citizenship, that it should be for all. So what you could do here, you could offer to these illegal immigrants, all right, if you want to be a citizen, you must earn it. You must agree to serve for a period of 5 years in the armed forces of the United States in any capacity for which you are qualified. You must, of course, serve honorably for a period of 5 years. If you mess
Yes.
up, if you misbehave, you're deported automatically. No appeal. But if you serve honorably for 5 years, you have earned your citizenship, and then you become a citizen. So you provide a sort of safety valve, and that would also help the armed forces of the United States with any potential manpower problems. If you get enthusiastic and people who are willing to pay the price to become a citizen. So that is another method that they could use. It is possible also that we could, given time and the proper procedures for educating those who genuinely wish to become citizens, to absorb successfully some of these illegal immigrants and make them legal, legitimate citizens. But they must go through an educational process, the same process that legal immigrants have to go through in order to become naturalized citizens. It's not a free ride, but in the very short term, in order to get rid of people who are national security risks, Texas governor has also, by the way, just agreed to arrest and detain CCP operatives, Communist Chinese Party operatives who are in the United States. He deems them as national security risk. They should be deported immediately. And this is where, again, it's where American citizens who are identified as having successfully identified and located illegal immigrants, they should be compensated for having cooperated with law enforcement. So this is what is needed in order to make the incoming President Trump's mass deportation efforts maximally effective and successful without having to resort to violent or supposedly inhumane means of doing so. Now, mind you, law enforcement agencies, when they're dealing with apprehending violent criminals, immigrants with criminal records, they should have the right to use deadly force if necessary in order to defend themselves should these illegal immigrants with violent criminal records resist arrest or deportation. That is practically a given. So will there be some violent confrontations between law enforcement agencies and illegal immigrants? Well, depending upon the nature of the immigrant, yes, it's quite possible. And that should be expected as part of the process. Because essentially what you're dealing when you're talking about anywhere from 11 million, and some say maybe as many as 21 million illegal immigrants, that's an invasion. That's something that is practically unprecedented in not just American history, it's unprecedented in world history. Even the waves of immigration that took place in earlier American history, by the millions, of course, from Europe, that was peaceful. They were being successfully absorbed into American society. They were assimilating into the American culture. They brought their own national uniqueness with all of the oh my goodness, someone just popped up with it and said, I am under the impression that Starship Troopers was a satire of fascism. You are correct, sir. It is. It is. If you watch the movie, at Hollywood movie Starship Troopers, yeah, you could pretty much recognize it. Yeah, that's a satire of fascism. A very good point, sir. But anyway, yes.
Jonathan, I would like to mention that the immigration problem is not typical just a United States problem. It's a European problem, and maybe even more so just as well. For example, I would like to remind you that there were situation in about, I live in Canada, in about 6-7 years ago, there was a immigration wave to Canada from Syria. And most of the people, at the time when our friend Vladimir Putin started to move some movements in Syria at the time, but it was a time when Barack Obama was the president, and he was not, he was quite accommodating to Putin at the time. Now, the issue is how you can absorb such a wave of immigrants from Syria while Canada is not a very populous country, as you know. Now, what's interesting is that the immigrants were very carefully selected. And actually, there were a large Armenian community in Syria. So what they did, they arranged for Armenian living in specifically Toronto area. They were absorbing all immigrants from Syria of Armenian descent, and they provided housing, they provided means to live, to education, find them or trying to help them with a place of work. And this immigration was absolutely flawless. There was absolutely no single case where there was some kind of unrest, social unrest, or anything like this. It was very, very well organized, peaceful immigration. Now, another example, Poland. What Russia did, they've arranged just recently, last year, 2 years ago, while Ukrainian war was already underway, Russia arranged for thousands of immigrants from Syria, from other Middle Eastern countries. They brought them to the border of Belarus and Poland. Thousands of people, and you can go through the border, and then you will be in the European Union. You can go to any country of your choice. You can go to France, Italy, or Spain if you like really good warm climate. Go ahead and please yourselves. So, of course, Russians want to destabilize the order of European Union, but they didn't anticipate what Poland did. Poland put well-armed troops right on the border, and they've announced that anyone crossing the border will be killed, no questions asked. Poland is for Poles only, in spite of the fact that Poland is part of the European Union and they have to oblige with their regulations or so on. They said, yeah, we can oblige with all kind of regulation except one. Poland is for Poles only. Anyone crossing the border will be killed, no question asked. Guess what? No one crossed the border. And Russia had to take...
Amazing how that works.
so they have to really transport them all back to Syria and all other countries. Now, interestingly enough, that as Mr. Zelensky, president of Ukraine, he made offer to President Trump that Ukrainian troops actually can replace U.S. troops in Europe, in NATO.
And that would be a very attractive offer.
It's very attractive, but they can go even further. They can use Ukrainian troops on the southern border of the United States just as well. So they could do a very capable job.
That might be a bridge too far, but you never know. You
never know.
President Trump might well find that an attractive offer, one that he wishes to take advantage of, to take the pressure off of National Guard troops or other troops in order to enforce border integrity along the southern border. But in any case, it is a fascinating position that the incoming Trump administration has. They have multiple challenges, and President Trump, I would argue, is fully justified in declaring a state of national emergency, not just because of the illegal immigration problem, which by itself, given its magnitude, would justify declaring a state of national emergency, but given the fact that you also have a $35 trillion national debt that is accelerating annually with a $1 trillion interest on the national debt every year. So it is rapidly approaching the point where if something is not done to sharply reduce spending, create national surpluses in excess of $2 trillion a year to drive down the national debt and reduce the interest on the national debt, then you have the makings of an economic catastrophe in several years. And President Trump fully recognizes that, along with his incoming cabinet. So that is going to be a very interesting problem. Yes.
From history, I'm pretty sure you know that if for a certain period of time, the payment of the debt, the interest, is higher than expenses for your army, the Pentagon expense.
That is where it's at now. That is where it's at now, and that is why there is such urgency on the part of the incoming administration to sharply reduce spending, and yet do so in a way that it reduces the interest on the national. That's the scorecard that you watch. What is the interest on the national debt after the incoming Trump administration implements its policies, sharply dismantles portions of the federal government, deregulates, tries to, in such takes a leaf from what Javier Milei of Argentina has been doing. Yeah,
Oh my God, he's a genius. I saw his interview with this Russian Friedman, I think. That was fantastic. You know, he's a scientist. He's not just economist. He knows probably more than 99% of all economists put together. He read all books. He's subscribed to Austrian School of Economics and so on. He is a genius. Period.
If the incoming Trump administration can duplicate that work of genius and dismantle large portions of the federal government, decentralize, deregulate, cut expenses, because if President Trump wants to cut taxes in order to avoid larger deficits, they have to be able to cut spending even more than they cut taxes. Yet that approach has never been successfully implemented. But in this case, because President Trump will have a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate behind him, he should have enough time and enough political strength behind him to implement these policies. Now, interestingly enough, what impact does this have on the current war in Ukraine? Well, guess what? On one of the Russian TV programs, they mentioned something which I thought I would never see in the Russian media, but they talked about being able to strike in space at American satellites. Now, the reason that is interesting, there was a war game back in 1997 conducted by the Army War College in which the Red Team did such a thing, only they had much more in the way of anti-satellite weapons than Russia does currently. But it was recognized that it could have a very damaging effect on the American way of being able to conduct war assuming control of Earth orbital space. So there is a logical counter to what the Russians are threatening. And in order to do that, what I've suggested on previous programs is that the U.S. take the U.S. Space Force, which currently consists of 80 satellites. To the Russians and the Chinese, that's not a space force. That is a set of 80 targets waiting to be exploited or destroyed. In order to make it truly, you must take the Space Force to its full potential by creating a U.S. space fleet. And where would you get the space fleet from? From SpaceX, Elon Musk. Here he comes again. We could essentially say to the Pentagon, Pentagon, we would like to buy 12 of your Falcon 9s, 12 of your Falcon Heavy spacecraft, and 12 of your Starships, along with supporting equipment to create a space fleet, which could operate both in low Earth orbit, in geosynchronous orbit, and on the moon, in order to fulfill not only several necessary planetary defense missions, but would be the central pillar of what I've described before as the worldwide strategic defense matrix, WISDOM. That is what the Russian political and military leadership fear more than anything else. They fear the potential of American technology to neutralize the one thing that makes them a great power in their own perception, their nuclear missile arsenal. The fact that the Russians have been brandishing their nuclear missile arsenal all throughout the Russian-Ukrainian war, trying to play on American fears of escalation, this reveals their potential weakness. If you can use American technology, along with cooperation with our NATO partners, to create the worldwide strategic defense matrix, this neutralizes the central pillar of Russian military might. And by extension, it would also neutralize Chinese nuclear missile arsenal, North Korean, and Iranian, assuming it ever takes place. So you would have, by neutralizing the nuclear missile arsenals of our principal adversaries, we would create a very firm foundation for creating strategic stability not only in Europe, but throughout the world. But the mere fact that the Russians are mentioning the possibility of striking in space indicates that they are aware of how much U.S. military power relies upon space superiority and unhindered use of space in order to be able to augment the power of its military forces worldwide. So this is something that we need to be very careful of. And the incoming administration definitely has its hands full. But the good part of all of this is there are logical solutions to these problems that face us. As Albert Einstein once said, he said that the problems we now face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. And what he meant by that was, you can't just, if you're faced with unprecedented problems, you cannot solve them using the solutions that you are used to. You have to make an imaginative leap. Imagination is just as important as creativity and conventional intelligence. You have to be able to make that leap and have the courage to test an idea that has not been implemented before. Well, Javier Milei has done just that down in Argentina. In a sense, we should follow his example and make that imaginative leap, have the courage to implement it, because when you do the thought experiments, in theory, sharply cutting spending, even more than you cut taxes, should work. And there are other means which could be implemented to strengthen that. And that is something that I would probably want to explore in a future program, because right now there are a whole host of ideas that could be explored. But right now, Ukraine still has, even in the waning months of the Biden administration, even when the man is rushing aid out the door to Ukraine, okay, the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration seem to be working at cross purposes with each other. But in a sense, they are not. If the Biden administration gets Ukraine all the additional military aid that it's been asking for and gives Ukraine the permission to strike deep into Russia, okay, this presents the Trump administration with an interesting challenge, diplomatic as well as military, but it is not an unsolvable situation. If the Ukrainians, for their part, because they are not under the thumb of anyone really at this point, if they take advantage of the situation to inflict a decisive operational defeat on Russian forces, and a lot of people are saying, well, it's not possible to retake the Crimea. Not in the sense that they're thinking of. They're thinking of a straight invasion. If you successfully cut off the Crimea from supply and reinforcement, then the possibility exists for Ukraine with its strategic reserves to invade the Crimea and essentially force the occupying Russian forces to surrender. And the fact that Ukraine has now gained increased means of striking deep into Russia and further eroding their ability to continue the war is a very encouraging sign.
You see, right now, Russia, in anticipation of peace talks, especially when Trump administration will take power on January 21st, they are trying to grab as much territory as possible, and their means how they do it don't matter at all. And what they're doing is so-called meat attacks. For example, they're sending 100 fighters ahead, so Ukrainians kill all of them. 40 minutes later, there is another 100 people attack. They're all being killed. The next wave in 40 minutes. So this attacks continues all day from early morning to the late evening. They're losing about 1,500 people a day just to grab extra 10 meters of 20 meters of territory. This is absolutely horrible, but that's what they're doing to grab as much territory as possible. Now, they brought North Korean troops to Kursk region to get Ukrainian fighters out of there. So far, unsuccessful. Furthermore, the North Korean general was heavily wounded there, and North Korean probably will start to think whether they should indeed send 100,000 troops
into the meat grinder, because these are not elite troops. These are not elite troops that North Korea is sending. I mean, it's just the Russians lost their best troops at the very beginning of the war.
Yeah,
what they had, and they did not anticipate the effectiveness and the will of Ukraine to resist, and they are paying the price for it. And now Putin realizes that he's in too deep to quit, but he has to realize that soon the price of continuing the war will be greater than anything he could hope to gain, because he is not going to be able to take all of Ukraine or even a major portion of it.
You know what's tragic is that Putin and Russia, of course, they cannot stop the war at all, because if there will be some kind of peaceful agreement of one kind or another, they have to start going back to rebuild their economy, and this is next to impossible. They just lost everything what they had, because they're now in a worse case than in Brezhnev's time, for example. Because at Brezhnev's time, they were quite diversified economy, quite independent, with all these republics intact or so on. Today, Russia is alone, and there will be no Marshall Plan for Russia, as it could be for Ukraine, and most likely there will be no for Russia. Now, speaking about possible peace agreements between Russia and Ukraine once Trump will get in power fully, there are three scenarios, the way I understand it. The first one is Korean scenario, when there will be just on the front line, there will be divisions, there will be no peace agreement of any kind, but there will be just stop all the fighting. Call it Korean scenario. The second one is a German scenario. German scenario, I mean that this four regions that Putin wants to annex, okay, they will go, I hope, temporarily to Russia, as Crimea as well. And it will be, say, they already said that according to new Russian constitution, it's already Russian territory, one way or another. Okay, let's consider that. So the rest of the Ukraine will be like Western Germany in 50s. So that will be part of the Marshall Plan. It will rebuild. It will have an army that will be second to none in Europe, with all the weapons available and so on. That's German scenario. So the part of Ukraine will be like East Germany, and biggest part of the Ukraine will be intact, and it will be similar to West Germany. And finally, there is a Austrian scenario. Austrian scenario, I would call something that Russia will not only get all these territories, as I said before, but they will also control on the rest of the Ukraine how large Ukrainian army could be and what kind of weapons it could have. There will be no weapons coming in from West, from the United States. So there will be, in a way, you can treat it as an independent country, but it's not. It would have to always check whatever they are doing with Russia and get permission. Okay, we would like to do this. Okay, you can do this. No, you cannot do that, and so on. So it's quasi-independent, but not really independent country. What do you think, Jonathan, about these scenarios?
Of the three scenarios that you have mentioned, the West Germany style scenario, where the remainder of Ukraine remains independent and can be rebuilt and so forth, would be the most acceptable to the incoming Trump administration, and somewhat reluctantly to the rest of NATO as well. And so, okay, he's carved off a slice of Ukraine. He didn't get everything. He didn't get everything he wanted, but we have to make sure that Ukraine is strong and rebuilt and independent, and we can then go ahead and bring Ukraine into NATO and the European Union.
Absolutely.
And Putin would simply be forced to have to accept that. And Putin would have to go through the wrong rebuilding process, assuming he is able to survive that process. So of the three you have mentioned, I would argue that the West German style scenario is the most likely, and it is also the most acceptable to the West, at least. And in order for Putin and Russia to accept that, they must be made to see through military strength and resistance that the price of not accepting this agreement is much higher than simply agreeing to it and calling it a day.
Exactly. So I think that for Ukrainians it's very important to be active including using their attacking possibilities, which they're open to them. Um, Jonathan, would you ignore that a large intercontinental missile that hit
That
Dnipro?
that seems to be an exercise, i- almost an exercise in strategic bluffing, because it's a missile that technically is not really the range that it was fired. It seems to imply that it was fired from from the far eastern sector of Russia.
Yes, absolutely.
They had the range that technically would be would have intercontinental range, but in reality, it's really an intermediate range ballistic missile, an
Which
IRBM.
remember there were forbidden. There was agreement between Russia and United States about this intermediate missiles, and I'm surprised that Russia so openly used one because they
They
should have.
felt they felt that they obviously believed that given the current administration that is in power in the United States, that they could get away with it. You know, there would be there would be no excessive price to pay for their using what could be considered an intermediate range ballistic missile, which we a violation of the old now discarded INF treaty. But now it's and probably the Russians chose to use that IRBM because it is much more difficult for Ukrainian ballistic missile defense systems to intercept because
It's possible. It's a ballistic missile which going right straight down. How you can intercept it? But you can.
The only way you can do realistically stop missiles like that is with space-based systems. You would have to
Exactly.
you would have to have the installation of Wisdom. You know, you would have to have starships of the Space Force in low Earth orbit, armed with laser weapons that could destroy such missiles in their boost phase. Because that is when an ICBM or an IRBM is at its most vulnerable, when it is on its way up, when it cannot maneuver, it cannot use decoys. It is moving most slowly while it is in its boost phase. So therefore, it is most vulnerable to being destroyed by space-based laser weapons. And space-based laser weapons are most effective when they are mounted on starships rather than satellites. If you put laser weapons on satellites, you are creating a hair trigger situation in space because you are encouraging the opposing power to strike at the satellites. If an opposing power tries to strike at a starship, manned by Space Force personnel, no, that's a clear act of war. And it would be very hard for Russian or Chinese counterspace weapons to destroy a starship.
Yeah, okay. Jonathan, I would like to mention that Ukrainian leaders, they are of the opinion that with Western help being provided, they can handle Russia, and with help of North Korea, with all due respect, they can handle it. Iran will be handled by Israel or Israel with the help of the United States. That's not a problem. The biggest problem is China. They depend on their international trade. They heavily depend on the United States and Western Europe. So they cannot really go all in with Russia and so on because there will be consequences. However, Mount Trump, I don't know how of course, nobody knows how he's going to conduct his foreign policy toward China, but there could be a situation where he could actually offer China, look, you are a great power, so we are. So you're great at producing such and such things and so on, and our strengths and so on. Maybe, just maybe, we can help each other by certain agreements, and of course, we are not going to raise tariffs against you, and so give them some kind of carrots, so they would be, it would overweight significantly anything that they're getting today from Russia. They're not getting anything from Russia except cheap oil, but even that cheap oil, now the Chinese banks, they're scared of secondary sanctions, so they cannot even pay Russians for their oil. They have special account in yuan, So they keep, same as India in rupees, they sell, Russia sells their oil to India. So they have special account in rupees. It's growing, but they cannot take the money out of India. They cannot buy anything in India, same as with China. So this is basically a dead end for Russia right there.
Yeah. And so, and the incoming Trump administration, based upon it, the future foreign policy will seem to be mostly anti-China in emphasis.
Yes.
So they see China as the greater overall long-term threat. So
Oh.
they are going to be very focused on neutralizing China and in making sure that China cannot exploit the current international situation, as has been as I mentioned previously. Texas Governor Abbott has ordered the arrest of CCP operatives in Texas, whom he believes to be national security threats, and rightly so. And so, in this mass deportation effort, they are not only going. The Trump administration is not only going to be targeting, criminals, but also those whom they believe to be national security threats. They are going to be, and that is why if they can mobilize and incentivize the American population to voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement agencies and immigration agencies to identify and locate all illegal immigrants within the United States, this will assist the Trump administration greatly in achieving its goal of sharply reducing illegal immigrant presence within the United States. And at the very least, it would be unrealistic to say that they're going to get rid of all illegal immigrants within the United States. And that's quite possibly unattainable. And a more attainable goal would be to get rid of all of the criminal elements, the national security threats, and to reduce illegal immigrants to the point that it is manageable, where you can then deal with the remainder of the illegal immigrant population and establish a process of, say, okay, if you want to be a citizen in the United States, now you have to go through the process. If you are unwilling to go through the process, you are going to be deported. It's just that simple.
Excellent. John, I would like to, before we close our program, to emphasize how important for Trump this issue is, because apparently in election, it was second most important issue after economy and inflation. So this is a test, a real true test of Trump's capabilities to fulfill his obligations. And he does all.
Yeah. And right behind that is going to be the challenge for Elon Musk and Mr. Ramaswamy to reduce government spending, and the $2 trillion that they have mentioned, that would earn them a passing grade. Okay, with $1 trillion a year in interest, you have to be able to sharply reduce spending and create surpluses to pay off the national debt that are greater than $1 trillion per year. Otherwise, you're just treading water. You're not reducing it. So it will be very challenging for them to do so. And there is, like I say, as a hint, there is one other mechanism which we will be discussing, possibly in this program, possibly in another program. But there is it is an example of what Albert Einstein said when the problems which we now face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. You will need to make a leap of imagination and creativity in order to come up with a solution that no one has thought of before, because no one had to think of it before. Now we do.
Yes, we are forced now to think a little bit, not so in orthodoxy, but to be very inventive and creative all the way. Jonathan, thank you very, very much for a fantastic program today. And have a great weekend. And we'll see you on Tuesday, same place, same time. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye. Glory to Ukraine.